My name is Phil Gervasi, and I'm joined today by Nina Bargison, both of us from Kentik. So we are colleagues and friends for a couple of years now, at least. And
Hello.
we are Nina actually is a subject matter expert and an experienced network engineer in the service provider space. And so today we're going to be focused on the service provider space in particular and discussing how in the last few years telcos, telecommunications companies, service providers, they've been undergoing some pretty big changes in their entire ecosystem. So both on the technical side and on the business side, we're going to dig into that. And it's specifically in an area that Nina calls cloudification. If you don't know what it means, don't worry about it. We're going to unpack that today. And also, if you are interested in reading more later on, not right now, we want you to stay here with us, but later on, check out Nina's blog post on the Kentik website. It's called "The Cloudification of Telcos and the Evolution of the Telecom Ecosystem." That's a heavy title, so we're going to be digging into that content today, and of course, she goes further. So, Nina, thank you very much for joining me today. Before we do start, though, can you introduce yourself? Give us a little bit of background.
Yes, well, I'm Nina Barkison, and why am I at all interested in the telecom ecosystem? Well, that's because that's where I spent the last like 20, 25 years. 25 years this year. Oh my God.
That was
Oh,
quick.
so yeah, I can't believe that. So 25 years ago, Nina started at a telco in Denmark. And so I worked in the telco space at the incumbent telecommunication provider in Denmark and in the Nordics for a number of years, doing peering, backbone planning, capacity planning, network engineering, those kind of things. And then I moved on to Netflix and worked on interconnection strategy and partner engagement management, which is what we called. So that was basically about getting the movies as close to the end users as possible. End of story.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
and then I had a short track at a now disappeared company called Subspace, and then I ended up here, basically telling stories about what I've done before and how the wonderful tool that we are building at Kentik can be used for that.
Great.
Because,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
do I wish I had that tool earlier on? So that's why I'm here, I think. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, and I appreciate that background because my background is primarily in the enterprise space, and I know that you and I both work with TCP/IP, right, packets and flows, and so there's a lot of crossover. I get it, like we can both configure BGP, fine, but there are some big differences in practice and operations, in the philosophy and the methodology behind some things. I know in your world it's like get those packets into the core, out of the core as fast as possible. Not necessarily the same thought process on the enterprise side. So I do appreciate your background. So the enterprise world has embraced cloud a long time ago. What is cloudification? What do you mean by that term in the context of the service provider space?
Well, what we see is that, in particular, on slide decks, but also more and more in the real world, you see some part of the network functions are moving from being on-prem at the telco and run by the telco from the hardware to writing the software themselves, is now moved onto the cloud instead. And again, so it's if you look at these companies as an enterprise, I guess it's just the same process as has happened in the enterprise space. But the weird thing is that it's part of the network. And what really confused me and got me interested in understanding what was going on was this: like, how can we have a network if some of it is run in the cloud? So what is this about? Um, and so I tried to figure out what is it that is happening. So what is that's happening is that part of the functionality that is in the network or in the network support systems is moving onto the cloud because it could be easier to do that than running it yourself. And some of it is not. But and so that was what I was trying to investigate.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, but why did that happen only? I mean, I don't want to say the word recently as in like the last year or two, but more recently when you compare it to like large enterprise, even some smaller enterprises too, it seems like there was a delay.
I think I think part of it is that telco systems takes a really, really long time to be renewed. So I think that's one of it.
Okay.
And another part is so you have to go all the way back into the devices and look at basically the software architecture needs to be able to support it. Right.
Mhm.
So you have these systems that have been developed over time, and you've been writing them at some time, a long time ago. I have some good friends who, done some work for Ericsson and work with other providers like that. And I was discussing this with them over dinner, and they were like, my friend Karen, she was going, wait, what? We built that 10 years ago. I mean, why is that a thing now, Nina? And it's
Yeah.
like, well, yes, you designed that as a software, she's this, software designer. You designed that 10 years ago, but it's not until now that people in the real world are starting to trust these systems enough to sort of put
Yeah.
maybe a BSS system, maybe an OSS system up in the cloud or in a cloud structure, because it's not necessarily into the public cloud we talk about when we talk about the cloudification. It is just using that architecture.
Mhm.
We're running things in containers, or in services, and actually a lot of words that I'm not super expert in, but I learned about when I was trying to figure out what was going on and why it has such an impact on the industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that was one of the things that I think I realized, is the fact that you can split the functionality up. You always done that. You had one system for this, one system for that. But doing it in a more structured way, or maybe
Mhm.
even more standardized way, because telcos have been very dependent on their provider, is it provider? Sorry, I forget. I'm losing my words here. Say if you buy a telco system like a mobile network, you buy everything from the same vendor.
Sure. Yep.
That's the word, right? Um, and then the vendor, you're kind of locked in, and the vendor decides everything on the infrastructure or the architecture. But if you have a more standardized way of this box works this way and that box works that way, you can sort of mix and match more, which is what we did in the IP network comparing to the mobile network. But I think part of the cloudification, and whenever you dig into whatever people are writing about it, you always look at it's just the mobile network splitting up,
Yeah.
basically. Does that make sense, what
Oh
I'm
yeah.
saying?
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing it for years. Absolutely, it's just interesting after reading your blog post and then talking to you that it really, when you take a step back and look at it, it was this kind of a delayed start on the telco side, and I know for whoever is buying gear, enterprise telcos, web scale, small companies, there's a return on investment, a cost benefit analysis. So number one, buying the gear. So if you're buying, huge core routers of any vendor, regardless of the vendor, even if it's some, off brand, it's going to be wildly expensive because you are talking about physical gear and licensing and things like that. So you have a CFO somewhere who wants to get the every ounce of blood out of that stone, and you want to run it until it either is too costly to maintain or it just does not provide the functionality that you need to keep the business going. And so there is a reluctance to change out gear as quickly as you can if you're a developer where there's no gear to change out. You're just, creating something new, and you
Yeah.
plop it down on new x86 servers, or whatever you're doing, containers and other compostable infrastructure. And that was a thing. Let's start moving toward this compostable infrastructure where we can refresh our hardware more and more and more. One of the ways that I think folks started embracing that, though it wasn't really widely embraced as much as I think we thought it would be, was to disaggregate the control data plane and start using cheaper, COTS, cheap off the shelf white box, cheap switches, cheap routers, and then you're put on the OS that you want. Therefore, more programmable. Maybe put the control plane somewhere else altogether. So you make your local routing decisions on your hardware, on your chipset, but you control the policy, like you said, somewhere else in the cloud, whether it's your private cloud, and then you can do it that way. And it makes things more consistent. Now, all your routers, all your switches, all your firewalls are just managed from one spot, and you have this programmatic approach, exactly like you mentioned. But that's expensive. That's like, changing everything. It's ripping it all out, and even if you wanted to do it little by little, it's hard because now you have multiple infrastructures to manage. So that's a hard sell as well. So you used a couple of different terms in your blog post. We're talking about telcos. That's kind of the broad term. But in your blog post, you said netco and servco. Now, I know what those mean because I read the post, so I know what you mean by that. Why do you make those distinctions? Why is that necessary?
Well, that's because something I've seen happening, in particular in Europe, is, I'm linking it a little bit to being able to split things out more because of the software architecture.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that the companies are being differently organized, where usually when you had a big telco, it was a vertical. You had your customers on the top, and you had all the support for customers, and you had the product development, and you had operations, and then you had the network. And so you were able to, you needed to be able to do all of that. And what we're seeing now is at least in Europe, a move where you take all of the customer focus with the high volume of customers, and you create a company that does that. And then you create a company that takes care of the infrastructure. Okay. So instead of having these verticals where you have like a company who does everything from broadband, and you does everything from customer support down to actually building and digging the fiber into people's homes, then you will have somebody who's just creating products and selling to customers and have customer support. And you have somebody else who's digging fiber into the homes and but then wholesaling those connections to those other companies. So you're trying to sort of, there's a horizontalization of the market going on, of the companies going on.
Right.
And the idea behind that is supposed to that if you do not have the heavy load on all the heavy and expensive infrastructure, you are more agile and you can create products faster and have a different mindset of running the companies and different kinds of investors. And if you're building infrastructure and only need to care about a few customers, at least compared to, being a wholesaler, compared to having consumer customers, millions of consumer customers, you can focus all your effort on running that network efficiently. And you can also attract long-term investors who understands that when you build a fiber and you dig down fibers, you're looking at a 30-year return on investment and not a 1 year.
Okay.
And you're not looking at a quarter by quarter,
Yeah.
But
you're not installing fiber in the ground nearly as often as you're writing in code.
Yeah. So so that should be part of the idea. And then, what I also saw on all the research on what was going on cloudification, I noticed that some companies have popped up, and this is in the US, which is even more fun, is sort of like an API company, which would sort of be, hey, we can help you as maybe a broadband provider who does not have a mobile network. We have a mobile network in the cloud, and we have APIs down to the netcos. So we can help you easily design and sell a mobile subscriptions for your broadband providers. And suddenly this broadband network is a triple play or dual play network, where there used to be just a broadband network.
So you're saying that telcos are even in the US, they changed to accommodate these new software architectures. You're talking about the utilization of APIs to facilitate fast new service delivery, things like that. I mean, see, the thing is, wouldn't it also be advantageous to own the entire chain, right? I mean, therefore, I get to control everything and it's more efficient, or no?
Well, that's the thing. That's what we thought, right?
Yeah.
That's how it used to be. Like people would own everything, and even they would own not only just the selling infrastructure, they would also sell the content, and they
Mm-hmm.
would sell, all kinds of communication services. And but at least in Europe, I mean, it's failing, right? Because I mean, there's a lot of content, and the telcos are selling a lot of content and bundling it with the broadband connections. But if you look at it, a lot of that content is over the top content,
Yeah.
where the telco is actually making partnerships with people like Netflix and Amazon and Viasat and who else is providing content for entertainment content, basically.
Yeah.
And that is being bundled into what used to be the cable TV would go out and get content to run on that network. It's just bundling in a different company now. So in order to do that and be more agile as well on creating those entertainment bundles and all that kind of stuff, doing that in the same company that is also digging the fibers,
Mm-hmm.
it just seems like it's not working, and it doesn't have the same type of mindset that you need to sort of be strict. And we can't really make mistakes, because if we lay the C cable on on the wrong route, we can't do that in move fast and break things mode. But you can easily create like an entertainment bundle and move fast and break things and go like, oh shit, this is not working, and then you can sort of change that.
Yeah. Assuming that the underlying infrastructure is there, reliable, you can trust it, and you have the mechanism to deliver your services. Because the cost of go ahead.
And there's the other aspect as well, is that you want to be able to reach all the customers in your market, not just the ones where your fiber is or your
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so where I live, so I can tell the story about where I moved in 10 years ago. Where I lived 10 years ago, when I moved in, I had 4 different physical connections coming into that house. I had 2 different fibers going to 2 different providers, and 2 different coax cables go to two different coax companies. So 4 different companies had built the pipe into the house that I lived in. And 5 years later, 3 of those connections belonged to the same company because of network consolidation. Maybe not the smartest way to do things. So I think part of the idea of splitting out the infrastructure is also to sort of like, maybe we're not overbuilding, so that if we have an open market where people who run the network has an obligation to sell to anybody who want to sell anything to the customers or buy a customer, they can do that. Then we are not having that overbuild. Of course, the risk is that the people who are running this are idiots and are not doing it well, so everything will be too expensive, or they will create a monopoly. But then we have regulation. At least in Europe, we have some strict regulation that tries to fix that issue.
Yeah, but from a technical standpoint, although we have been digging into the business aspect here, but from a technical standpoint, what is the difference then with modern software architectures? That, like, what's so unique or different about the way we're doing that today, delivering services, that we need to do any of this stuff? Now, I mean, obviously, we're all familiar with this content delivery that is so important, both for entertainment, but also for how we deliver, business content and for municipal services, police and hospitals and that kind of thing. Exactly. So it's not just the entertainment stuff. It's how the world works. What's so different about it? I do want to say real quick, we did get a comment in the chat already. I'd like to address that. The question was, would be nice? It would be nice if the old equipment was compostable. That's with a T. Therefore, it would be useful in the garden. So when I saw that, I looked up the word. It is composable, not compostable, so I used the wrong term. However, I wonder if I did use the wrong term, considering how we bury in the ground so much of this infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Not a lot of it. A lot of it's buried under the waves, and a lot of it's in data centers and stuff. But moving on, though, I do want to know what you think there. What is the difference with the way we develop and deliver modern services, these new software architectures, that's different?
Well, I think it's the the difference is the more the pick and choose, and you don't have to put everything in the same backend.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, you're distributed computing, containerization of applications, so they're all over the place and pulling on stuff. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, and then also I think the focusing, there's the focusing on some companies just doing network, and I had this conversation with some folks when we were talking about what was going on in the U.S. markets, and funnily there is we're kind of seeing the netcos are coming as well, but as an answer to the big four or five, I can't remember how many of them,
Mm-hmm.
who all have their big old-fashioned telcos. They have the infrastructure, they have a lot of content, right? They've consolidated, they've bought up big content companies, and they have networks, or it was the other way around, big content networks bought networks. Big content companies bought networks. But what's been seeing is that over the years in the US as well, a lot of small and regional providers have popped up building fibers, just being, let me build a fiber network here, let me build a fiber network here. And now private equity companies have started to buying these up to create a big alternative to the big five. And these guys are only doing infrastructure. So they're just basically consolidating some infrastructure, pure infrastructure companies into an infrastructure company, and not caring about also producing a lot of content for their consumers, but just saying, hey, I'm building the pipe, and let's go. So it's kind of interesting to see how that will flesh out, if they will start looking at some of the content companies and sort of go, hey, how about we combine here? What's going to happen in the future there? That's interesting. Or if they will stay and say, we're just providing the pipe, but we do really well. So,
but even so, it does make sense, though, I guess, from a business perspective and from a technical perspective, as far as resources, design, supply chain, to be very focused on one area, because then you can automate as many processes as possible, your workflows, your actual operations. I have to assume that from a business standpoint, that's going to improve efficiency, the bottom line, profit, that sort of thing, speed to delivery, and then therefore resell those services to the servcos like you were talking about. So I guess the separation of services from a business standpoint makes sense, and from a technical standpoint, because now you hire your engineers and you have your warehouse full of gear or whatever else that you're doing, and you, again, specialize.
Well, I think it did that before, but I think it was probably and I've seen that in real life. The conflict between maybe the infrastructure part of the company and the consumer part of the company. I've in my past, I've seen some people being pretty broken by the conflict there in a negotiation with a third party about a deal that they wanted to do. Because infrastructure company was sort of like, well, we are doing this, and this is our revenue, and the other guys go, well, we want this shit, so you guys need to do what we want. It's quite an interesting battle to see.
Yeah, and it makes sense.
I mean, companies, the battle goes away in a way.
Yeah, and it does make sense with the way that we do consume any kind of service today. Almost everything is consumed over the network, and so there's new requirements for security. I read in your blog post that it seems to be developers are always employing an API first design, even at a broad scale, and it just changes the way that we, again, not on the network side, but just consume and create and deliver the services, usually applications.
Even on the network side, I think the routers today have their little not compartments, containers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. You're absolutely right.
And I mean, so the architecture I mean, modern software is designed that way today, right?
So then what specific network services, you mentioned NFV earlier, network function virtualization. What specific network functions, and then I guess network services, network adjacent functions, do you see on the telco side moving to the cloud? I can give you a short list of what we've been moving to the on the enterprise side for the past 10 years. What on the cloud seems to be those things that you want to get it out of the data center, get it out of the central office?
Well, all the business systems, right? I mean, you might still want to have them on the premise, but you want to have them in an environment that is compatible with other stuff that you're running in the cloud that's cheaper to run there anyways. So not a lot that throws data, because that's not, but all the compute, why would you run that yourself? Why would you do your analysis on your customers on your own gear? You might as well use some of the brilliant tools that the cloud providers are using. And also, some of the control systems could sit in the cloud as well. I mean, the control system that doesn't need to be distributed into the network, if you have them centralized somewhere, it could be a choice whether if you're small, you want to put them in the cloud because that's cheaper than running your own data center, or you could have them in your own data center, but still using the same type of software and same type of underlying infrastructure, just your private cloud, in your own data center. So everything that's centralized, basically.
Yeah, except for the things that can't be, right? Like you can't, move ASICs to the cloud. I mean, there are ASICs in the cloud, but I mean,
is probably a little bit different.
Yeah.
And a lot can be said as well about, the centralized routing plane, but that I'm not going to go into that discussion because I have been doing routing for so many years that I'm not really qualified to have a good opinion on that. But I do like the old distributed IP network. It does.
Sure. I mean, it depends on the use case. You want to you can move as much like, for example, policy management, security policy, routing policy. You can push that to the cloud and then push your updates to local devices, and the devices make their own local decisions, packet by packet, flow by flow, whatever it happens to be, because you could do it locally on an interface basis in hardware, much faster. It's real time. Sometimes you have no choice but to do that simply because you have such a high performance network. So in your provider core or in a very high performance data center, you really can't move anything out of that. It has to be done locally. And so you distribute your policy.
Customer provisioning, right?
Customer provisioning, right?
Where do you, somebody pushes a button somewhere and the customer exists, or actually the customer just go on a web place and say, hey, I'd like this connectivity on this is my address and here's my credit card. And then, boom, why would it take any time at all to provision a customer circuit? I mean, the infrastructure is there. I mean, is there a home that doesn't have a pipe into it? Yeah, I don't think so, right?
Yeah. So and you're talking about the daily operations, network operations, and provisioning new gear, provisioning new topologies, maybe whatever you have to do, configuring that stuff, and then pushing it out to your devices. And I think that's it. Clearly, it presupposes that we have the devices that could support that, and that's definitely been a cultural shift in networking and infrastructure for some time. I mean, I remember a long time, 20 years ago, everybody's managing their Windows boxes with like Puppet and Chef 15 years ago. And we didn't do that on the infrastructure side very much. And then you saw people do that more little by little. And now, maybe 5 years ago, everybody's running Ansible playbooks in Python to push config and to draw information for their analytics as well, not just push and config from, very ubiquitous, meaning common, everything the same boxes out there in your network. It takes a generation to get there, though, because you got to you got to get all your infrastructure on the same page as far as code versions and um,
Yeah. Yeah.
platforms, and then your staff to know how to do that and build out the back end. What am I using for my single sources of truth and all this stuff? So I think we're finally getting there. That's probably one of the reasons we're able to take advantage of those efficiencies in having a programmatic infrastructure. And like you said, you push a button. I mean, we say that in air quotes. Here's air quotes. It's a little bit more than pushing a button, but you push a button and you're provisioning new circuits for particular customers, including the security policies, including the fault tolerance policies, whatever your DNS pointers and all that stuff gets pushed out in one shot. So you mentioned we're talking about private cloud mostly. What are telcos using? And maybe this is a question better for folks in Europe. Maybe it's different in the US. But what are telcos utilizing?
Well, it's interesting to see because it seems like there are two different policies, right? There's some people who go into partnerships with the hyperscalers because they realize that the cloud infrastructure and the cloud technology that they have built is really good. So they go into partnerships with them, and then they use a combination of both public and private cloud. So, and others are just going, well, we've again created a partnership where they have worked with them to get the security to a level where the telco will move some of their functions onto the public cloud because it is now secure enough.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of seen both things happen with just the difference in strategy is sort of like go all in on the public and make sure that it's secure enough. And others goes, well, hey, how about we do? And I noticed that the hyperscalers are offering sort of like, well, do you want our technology in your private cloud just for you? We can support that.
Yeah.
I think both Amazon and Google are doing that, and Oracle kind of comes from that space, right? Because they used to run a lot of telco infrastructure and customer databases and all that stuff, and so basically OSS and BSS systems running on their technology, and they're sort of like cloudifying that part.
Yeah,
they changed their architecture to be a cloud.
And nothing happens overnight. This is all a process, right? I mean, this has been years and years, little by little. So when we say everybody's now cloudifying, no, it has been a process, perhaps delayed compared to other industry, but certainly a process over time because we have the ability. Like, for example, the trend to push security closer to the edge and to end devices and to in the enterprise down to the user even, it sort of means that the network can focus on being just fast, big pipes. It's just the plumbing. We don't care. You figure out the security part. And so that change has allowed changes to occur on the network side, a focus on speeds and feeds. And it really is that division of labor. No, I mean, that's kind of on the economic side. Separation of services. That has allowed those improvements to happen in various areas. Because ultimately, what's driving the business? It's not necessarily that like, hey, I got a 1.2 terabit pipe over here. Well, who cares? That's just the mechanism for, well, no, I want to be able to access this data in the form of an application that's over there on the other side of the world. I don't care. If satellite gave me amazing latency and bandwidth, I would use that. If I have to use undersea cables or if there's fiber overlay, doesn't matter to me. Just get me my data. And so I think that a lot of the business decisions are driven by probably the servcos, right?
Oh, I think it definitely is because I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen anybody talk at all about, how much bandwidth there is on their connection, right? Who cares anymore? I care. I just need the highest available because I can, not because I need it for anything, because what we're doing right now could be done on any modern connection today. I mean, so
well, we have the mechanisms in place on the application side to
Yeah.
accommodate for a variety of network issues, right? We're running this over HTTPS. And so, it's a stateful connection. We're compressing audio and video in order to accommodate that. There's also some error correction. And so you can run this webinar over, an old school T1, or what I have a gig in my house from my provider. It would probably be the same either way. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we don't care about bandwidth. Obviously, we have trunks
No,
and
no,
data
no.
center
Bandwidth
interconnects.
is like money. We just need enough, right?
Yeah.
So.
Or for some of us, we need all of it, right? How much bandwidth do you need? I need all of it, actually.
All of it. Just give it.
Yeah, yeah. So it is certainly a technological shift and a business shift. We even touched on it being kind of a cultural shift in the move towards changing the way we look at these services, the way we do business, and even some network operations stuff. Now we're able to incorporate some programmability to get us there, right? So, with the benefits that you've mentioned so far of moving in this direction have been the idea of being separating out these services, so being modular. And I mean, to me, it seems that now my network is just bigger, faster, dumber. I don't need to change things on the network. It's just this base layer. So now the servcos, the application layer, the developers, they move much, much faster because they're not thinking gear. They're not thinking we got to replace that core switch. So they're moving faster, and lo and behold, the network can accommodate that. Whereas before, it's like, no, I got to go touch 700 boxes to change my policies and update this and then do that. And that code on that core router won't support that. So give me a little bit. My next change window in December, I can update that code, and then we can deploy your application. Baloney, can't do that. And so now this separation seems to accommodate this modularity. It seems to accommodate
That's
really
kind of the
being more
idea.
agile. Yeah, exactly.
Of course, it can still end in a train wreck, right?
Oh
Because
yeah, how so? How so? What are the risks?
well, I see the one of the big risks is the creation of monopolies
Mm,
on the infrastructure side. I
yeah,
mean, that worries me. That instead of being efficient and providing whatever is needed, it will be, oh, it's going to take us a long time, or not getting enough money, because those companies need to be run so tight on the cost side that maybe there will not be supporting what is needed, what the need is from the SEFCOs, and giving that, hey, we're the only company, so why should we move faster just because you want us to?
yeah,
That is always a risk. Um, so that thing concerns me a little bit in this model. I kind of liked, that you can get more pipes into your home.
sure, yeah,
So that's at least is one risk. And the other one as well is the confusion maybe with the servcos, because are they really ready to give how much control do they want? Can they let go? Will the netcodes only be sort of like on the last mile, or will it also be on the core? How far down? Definitely in some markets, I've seen the servcos starting to build their own core networks, and eventually plan on going peering as well.
really.
Now you suddenly have dual infrastructure just somewhere else to serve the same customers. So I don't know. It seems sometimes somewhere in the world it looks a little bit confused about whether this model is clean or whether it's some hybrid of having part of the network but not the boring part of the network. I don't know. It's kind of what you look at.
Yeah,
So that's definitely some of the risks that I see. Um, Too much consolidation. And then also, if you have the API companies pop in, and you have a longer supply chain, and you have more people that need money. So maybe it's not going to be good for the consumers after all, because more people needs to get paid, and then in the end, the service will be more expensive.
yeah, yeah. And you
In my
also
world,
described
low
increased
consumer
complexity.
prices is
Yeah,
a goal, right?
yep, absolutely. And you just described just more complexity, more layers to
Yeah.
the entire workflow here of application to consumer. And so, who owns what and when, and who's responsible to what, and
And
what
when
do you
shit
do?
breaks,
That
you need
exactly.
to
That's what I
figure
mean. Who
that
do you call?
all around. Yeah.
And we kind of we talked negatively about buying everything from one vendor, how that can limit you. But there are folks, there are people in technical leadership and management and business leadership that like that, because then they can just call the one vendor. And I did work for a global company with 2,800 offices and 300,000 employees, a big company. And they worked with one network vendor, and for a reason, because they could call up that net. Think about how big this company is. They called up that vendor. They had their own code versions. So when I called TAC, I wasn't calling regular TAC. I was calling their specialized TAC. So there is benefit there, but that's a business benefit, I think. And in the context of how we've been describing it today, modularity suggests multiple vendors. It suggests disaggregation of services from a technical side, from control plane activities and security and policy and management pushed somewhere else. So yeah, there's a lot. There's a business shift, a technical shift, a culture shift, human beings. But it's getting pretty long here, and so we're going to wrap it up today. Nina, it has been a really great conversation. I love talking about networking, and I love talking to you about this stuff just because of your experience.
Oh, likewise.
Yeah, so thank you for taking the time with me. Now, for the audience today, I do want to remind you, as I mentioned earlier at the outset, to check out Nina's recent blog post on the Kentik site, The Cloudification of Telcos and the Evolution of the Telecom Ecosystem. That digs into some of these concepts and points that Nina and I made, mostly Nina, much deeper. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. See you in the next LinkedIn Live coming soon. Thanks.